This is about 25 minutes.
Well, now we'll take a look at the race for Minnesota's 3rd district. It's a district that encompasses the suburbs of the Twin Cities, from Rogers to the north to Bloomington and Victoria to the south. Republican Erik Paulsen has represented the 3rd district in Congress since 2009. His closest race was his first, which he won by 8 points. His Democratic challenger this year, Dean Phillips, he's a businessman. This is his first run for office, and as before, no formal debate rules are in play. In fact, we encourage you fellas to jump in and discuss things. Congressman, let me start with you. Immigration. Sanctuary cities, the president's talking about maybe sending the military down to the southern border to intercept this Honduras caravan that's coming in. In broad strokes, where should we be on the immigration issue?
Well, broad strokes with immigration, the economy is doing so well. I've been a strong advocate, actually opposite of the president on some of his policies. We need an immigration system that labor is following capital, and if we're going to continue our growth, we got to have low-skilled and high-skilled folks filling those jobs. And, of course, we want to intercept folks that are coming across the border and making a spectacle of that, but I would think we would be able to do that fine. And our ICE Border Patrol agents will be able to do that, as they should. I mean, many in Dean's party want to abolish ICE, and that would be a mistake. They're stopping drug interdiction, they're helping human trafficking, and I would think that's not going to be a problem. But immigration is important if we're going to make sure we're going to continue growth. And so I was one of the ones that signed the discharge petition to force some votes, to make sure our family separation issue on the border was halted, was not going to be a problem, as well as the DACA fix.
Do you support abolishing ICE?
I don't. I think we need ICE, but like any organization, federal or otherwise, it needs to be thoughtfully led and with well-trained people. And at the end of the day, this is really a question about comprehensive immigration reform. Congress has not acted in far too many years. This conversation is ongoing. There's an acute issue of the day or the week. We need comprehensive immigration reform. I'm appalled, frankly, at leadership in both parties that it hasn't occurred, and it's one reason I'm running for Congress.
Can we do some kind of a DACA dreamer deal in exchange for money for President Trump's wall? I mean, is there the makings of a deal out there in 2019?
I really think that's the natural compromise, is that, the left and the right have always polarized on this, and so you have to have all of one side or the other, and nothing gets done. And that's one of the reasons that I signed that discharge petition, was to force some votes. But sure, you can do some enhanced border security measures. You can do DACA reform. And by the way, for all practical purposes, those are America's children. They only speak English. They've grown up here. If you're in their military, if they're working in higher education, they should be able to be here.
Mr. Phillips, what do you think of that?
Yeah, the congressman and I agree. I think the only thing that's different is that Congress has failed to act for a long, long time. And that is what disturbs me the most. This conversation is ongoing. Human lives are being talked about as numbers, and we're better than that. And we need collaboration. We need leadership in both sides of the aisle to get together and get this done. I'm appalled, and frankly, we can do better.
But we don't need sanctuary cities, or we should not be a sanctuary state. I think we should have our local law enforcement working with the feds at all opportunities.
Where are you on the sanctuary state business?
I go back to comprehensive immigration reform, and our public safety officials and our officers and police forces should be focused on local safety. And I'm following national law enforcement in most cases saying we want to focus on taking care of the people in our communities.
You were one of the architects of the tax cuts, or at least you were a big supporter of the president's tax cuts. Right now, though, we're looking at a deficit of $779 billion, and those tax cuts fit into that deficit, obviously. So, I mean, do you really think you want to make these tax cuts permanent for individuals?
Well, absolutely. That was part of the problem we had before when we were confined to these arcane Senate budget rules. We could address business taxes, so we were no longer, well, now we're competitive. We were one of the most uncompetitive countries in the world, and now we are the most competitive country, it was just announced this week, in the world for our economy. We should make the rates permanent, though, for individuals and families, because they need to have certainty as well as our small business community. And it has resulted in tax cuts for folks with rates being lower. But I would say more importantly, economic growth. And so we've seen unemployment levels at the lowest level in 50 years. In fact, the 3rd district has the lowest unemployment rate of any district in the country at 1.9%. It's a good problem to have. And with growth, things are going to improve in the long run.
But are you worried about the deficit? That is a big deficit. It's getting pretty close to $1 trillion.
I am worried about the debt and the deficit. And all of our discussions during the Obama years, we actually raised taxes. I didn't support that, but then we saw growth go down. The deficits increased anyway. And the good news is CBO is also saying now in the long run, our ratio of GDP to debt ratio actually gets better in the long run.
The tax bill, they're like a lot of legislation. There are parts of it that I like, parts of it that trouble me deeply. I favored a reduction in the corporate tax rates. I think it was important that we be competitive with the rest of the world. I also wanted to see the repatriation of dollars held overseas, a great stimulus. I think the timing of this bill was strange. What really troubles me is the lack of an accrual of benefits to the middle class in America. That is how we create a sustainable, growing economy. That, I think, would actually try to approach some of this debt resolution and deficit resolution that we need. But what deeply troubles me is the fact that we're adding $1.5 to $2 trillion to our national debt. Congressman Paulsen has pointed out in the past that one of the great risks of this country is our debt and deficit. And next year, we're going to be spending $390 billion just on our debt service. And as that increases, Eric, as a part of our federal budget, there's less discretionary resources to spend on the programs like Medicare and Social Security that we need.
Defense spending, Medicare, Social Security, that's most of the budget right there.
It's a lot of it.
So where do you cut if cutting is the way to do it? If tax increases aren't the way, what do you cut, or how do you bring things into balance?
Well, unlike Mitch McConnell and Congressman Paulsen and many members of the Republican Party, Medicare and Social Security are off limits. These are earned benefits that I will fight like heck to maintain. The category that I think we need to look at is defense spending. We spend more than the next 7 economies combined. I agree with President Trump on this. I think it's time for our allies around the world to do more, to carry more of that load. I think over 10 years, it'll cost $414 billion just in Iraq and Afghanistan, those wars. I think it's time that we start turning our attention to people in this country and take better care of ourselves.
Yet we know that Congress has not done anything really to deal with Social Security and Medicare. I mean, these are two, like, the third rail of American politics. And that something, that something has to be done because we're all aging pretty fast around here. So, and those are big hunks of money in the budget. What do you do?
Well, they're big hunks of money, but I would say this. If you go back to last fall, and, Dean, you said the tax bill was awful, that it would be an easy vote to vote against. And now we've seen such strong economic growth. I mean, the tax cuts average in the 3rd district are closer to $5,000, a little bit better than the 3rd district, or 2nd district you were just mentioning earlier. But growth is critical to solving other problems. With payroll taxes coming in stronger, we've actually strengthened Medicare right now. We've strengthened Social Security. The Congressional Budget Office acknowledges that. The best way to reform those programs, though, is to making sure we're focusing on coordinated care. We're not just doing reimbursement on the number of procedures and activity, but it's on value and it's on results. And those are broader conversations that can actually enhance and save these programs, which are important for not only current seniors, but baby boomers and future generations.
Let me address this. What I said was awful, Congressman, and you know this, is the lack of an accrual of benefits to middle-income Americans. That's what I said. And frankly, 12 of your Republican colleagues in the House, as you well know, Congressman, voted against that bill because it was a disservice to their constituents. The congressmen from New Jersey, New York, California, higher tax states that take significant advantage of the state and local tax deduction. It is a disservice, I would argue, to Minnesotans. A lot of people I'm speaking with are getting tax increases. Thousands of Minnesotans are getting tax increases. And that's a simple truth. I would have done as 12 of Congressman Paulsen's Republican colleagues did.
Well, he would have voted, but I would just to be clear, is that now under the new tax law, lower and middle income folks are actually paying less of a tax burden. And, millionaires like you, Dean, have to pay a little bit more as a share of the federal burden. But I would not, we need to continue.
Congressman, we need to continue
there
these thousands of, but
in Nancy Pelosi's first bill, she wants to repeal.
Are there not thousands of Minnesotans across socioeconomic positions that are receiving
overwhelming
tax
number of Americans
increases
and families that are getting tax cuts? And that's where we've seen all the
growth
answer is
yes.
Benefits.
Winners and losers, and a lot of losers in Minnesota.
And I fought to fix that SALT deduction because initially the bill had no deduction.
That's what hurts Minnesota SALT. Because we have the high local taxes.
So we raised it up to that cap, and I'd be okay going a little bit higher, but that's for middle-income folks. If you got rid of it, sure, it would help those all in the 1%. That's where the vast majority of those benefits would go.
Congressman, that's like lighting a house on fire and bringing a bucket of water to it. You serve on the Ways and Means Committee. You wrote that bill.
We wrote the bill, and that's why we put in the cap. We raised it from $0 to $10,000.
It's a disservice to Minnesotans.
We have some ads that we're going to run right now, and these are each ads from your Facebook campaign pages and created by your campaigns. I'm going to start with this. This is an ad from the Your your Facebook page, Representative. You say that Dean Phillips did not pay taxes. So let's watch that.
I'm Erik Paulsen, and I approve this message.
Dean Phillips joking about not paying his taxes.
And that's the extent of my tax fraud.
Phillips repeatedly didn't pay his taxes, and he claimed a homestead tax credit on 2 of his houses at the same time. Worse, Phillips supports an energy tax that would raise heating bills and gas prices. Phillips even said he was disgusted by middle-class tax cuts, calling them awful. Dean Phillips doesn't pay his taxes, wants to raise yours.
Explain your thinking behind this.
Why was this important?
Well, I think this is important because Dean has a record of not paying taxes on time, whether it was at his businesses or whether it was on his personal or not paying on his personal taxes, including the exemption for 2 of your multi-million-dollar mansions, but personal and business taxes. And that's a pattern that obviously when you want to raise taxes and vote against the tax cut bill, that we wanted to point out as a part of that ad.
First and foremost, I do pay my taxes. I do not want to raise taxes. In fact, I called that tax bill awful because it didn't accrue enough benefit to middle-income Americans. I think we had an $89 interest charge on a late property tax bill at our ice cream plant in Marietta, Georgia in 2012 and 13. And in 2017, I paid my Hennepin County property tax bill 5 days late because I had a fraud alert on my bank account. That's the extent, and that's why I was actually joking. I don't know how they got that video in my campaign office, but I was joking with some supporters about that's the extent of the tax fraud that Congressman Paulsen points out, which is part and parcel of one of the most dishonest campaigns that Minnesota has ever seen in congressional races.
Please.
And as a member,
there was an actual,
let me, sir,
there was actually a broader,
as a member of the House Civility and Respect Caucus, I find it appalling that you're running a campaign that is so full of falsehoods and dishonesty.
Well, the fact is that campaigns are about differences and elections are about choices. And you've been misrepresenting my positions on a number of different areas. And so it's important for me to make sure that questions are raised about some of your positions and background as well. And that's appropriate to bring that up.
We have another ad, and this is from Dean Phillips' campaign. And you compared Erik Paulsen to a wall. So let's see that.
I'm Dean Phillips, and you've heard how my campaign for Congress is all about having a conversation. Well, this is a wall, and it's kind of like Erik Paulsen. It's a nice wall, but you can't have a conversation with it. Like on gun violence, Erik voted 21 times to let people on the terrorist watch list get guns, even domestic abusers. He won't budge. And he's voted 98% of the time with Donald Trump. Won't budge on that either. I approve this message. How about you?
Okay. What's behind that? Explain that.
Well, I believe representation begins with listening, and I've done that for 18 months, driving my old 1960 International Harvester truck around the district, and I listen to people. And the most common complaint and most common conversation I have with people is the lack of Congressman Paulsen's accessibility. Hadn't had a town hall meeting in 7 years until this very campaign. He had 1 day of them. Doesn't appear in public. This is only one of, I think, 3 debates in closed environments, not willing to get in front of people. I think it's a core responsibility and duty of members of Congress and candidates to spend as much time in front of people as possible. The fact that voters in the 3rd District has not had one opportunity to see Congressman Paulsen and me side by side being asked questions by people who wish to hear from us is a dereliction of duty.
Okay.
And that's what that's about.
Number one, we're at a debate right now. We offered to do 3 additional debates, which your side has not accepted yet. But everyone knows in the district, everyone knows that I am accessible. So whether it's teletown hall meetings, whether it's personal town hall meetings, whether it's Congress on your corner events, or individual meetings with constituents, I hold open office hours. More than 150 individual constituent meetings. So sure, some of Dean's supporters say, oh, you don't meet with me enough, or we don't have forums with your campaign rallies. But I'm not going to go to those, but being effective is listening to folks in the district. I'll continue to do that at forums and clubs that are around the district and roundtable events. I do that constantly. You wouldn't find anyone who hasn't been able to meet with you if they wanted to.
How about your voting record on guns?
Oh, this is easy because I've actually broken ranks on many occasions to actually push forward solutions on gun violence. So, boy, you take the Parkland tragedy, for instance. Ted Deutsch, who represents that area in Parkland, we got together with 4 of us. And
he's a Democratic congressman.
He's a Democratic congressman. There are 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and we came forward and said we should have gun violence restraining orders. This is a workable, bipartisan opportunity addressing mental health, but law enforcement should have the capability, if someone is a threat to themselves or to others, to come in and remove weapons in a case. You can have probable cause and due process, and these laws work in some states. We should have that at a federal level.
Congressman Deutsch will actually be in town on Monday night at a forum that I'm hosting on gun violence prevention. I've recognized an appetite in our community for people to be educated on issues. We've hosted now, this will be the 4th forum we've hosted. Hundreds of people attend. Ted Deutsch will be there. And Congressman Paulsen has an A rating from the NRA, received over $21,000 from the NRA. His record on gun legislation is awful.
What do you want to see done?
Oh, I think it's universal background checks. Perfect example. Most Americans, Democrats and Republicans, agree. It's another example of a Congress that is comprehensively ineffective, bought and sold by special interests. And excuse me, Congressman, I'm on a mission to do just the opposite. I don't take any PAC money, no special interest money, no money from any federal lobbyists, and no money from members of Congress.
Don't you take money from a group that is trying to get money out of politics? That's a PAC, isn't it?
I don't take any money from Citizens
But he
United.
welcomes that money being spent on his behalf.
They're spending on your behalf.
I welcome anybody who is with me to effect comprehensive campaign finance reform. In 1997, Congressman Paulsen, when he was a member of the Minnesota House, authored or co-sponsored legislation that would have gotten rid of PAC money and special interest money in elections, and now has just moved up to the number 4 position in the entire House of Representatives out of 435 people in special interest money received. I take none.
This district is the 7th highest outside spending district in the country.
Yeah, I believe it. I've had a record of actually having probably the most special interest money spent against me in my elections. And now Dean welcomes all of this money that comes in from special interest groups. It's all the same thing. And by the way, on the gun restrictions, gun violence, I will say I helped lift the ban on gun violence research. I helped fix the NICS background check system. And we also have more money now going into school violence protection, going to school districts. That's important across the board for states and local communities.
Let me respond to this. I'm being outspent 3 to 1. 3 to 1. And at the very beginning of this campaign, almost 8 months ago, I invited Congressman Paulsen to join me in signing a very simple pledge called the Minnesota Way Pledge. Simple pledge. No PAC money, no special interest money, no self-funding, which Congressman Paulsen in 1997 wrote legislation that would have gotten rid of that PAC money. And it would have also disavowed all the outside money, all the nasty, mean-spirited ads that we're seeing. Well, most some are coming from Congressman Paulsen, too. It would have gotten rid of all that. It was the same pledge that Congressman Paulsen challenged Terry Bonoff to sign in 2016, the People's Pledge. And the other component of it was appearing in public twice a month in front of voters. And Congressman Paulsen refused to sign it. And I think this would be a wonderful opportunity this late in the campaign to understand why.
Well, and it's not actually the same pledge.
What about it?
It's different than the pledge that I offered to Senator Bonoff.
Go ahead.
It's different than the pledge I gave to Senator Bonoff on the outside money. But
how so?
Are you gonna offer now to pay the $3 million that have been spent on your behalf? Do you have that money in your campaign? Are you going to self-fund? I mean,
Congressman, I offered this to you 8 months ago.
Well, and now you're saying you will self-fund, as you did on the first day when you got in the race. And I don't think we should ever have
my question was a very simple. My question was a very simple one. What element of my simple pledge? It would have made, by the way, it would have made this the most principled campaign and race in the entire country. What part about it did you disagree with?
You know, it's hypocritical to say.
No, what part of it did you disagree with?
It's hypocritical to say that you only want that when it doesn't help you.
Congressman, you authored legislation. You challenged Terry Bonoff.
I campaign the same way that Amy Klobuchar does, that every other member of the Minnesota delegation does. It's the same. So,
and I think
what are they doing, DeSantis?
No, I'm glad you bring this up because
is Amy Klobuchar not campaigning the Minnesota way?
I'm so glad you bring it up. I think every Democrat and every Republican in this Congress should get on board. We need comprehensive ethics reform. We need comprehensive voter engagement reform, and we need comprehensive campaign finance reform.
I'm going to switch subjects here. 2008. Congressman, you said, when asked whether humans were contributing to global warming, you said, I am not smart enough to know if this is true or not. What do you know now?
Well, I wasn't not as a non-scientist, but I do believe that there's a contribution there. It's one of the reasons why I have been part of a group of Republicans that has actually passed or rejected amendments offered by some of my more conservative colleagues to not allow the Pentagon or the Defense Department to take into account climate change issues, and they should be able to take that into account. And so, being a part of the Climate Solutions Caucus, we have to have one Democrat and one Republican join. I've learned a lot more in this space, and so I'm excited to move forward.
I'm very intrigued by I think it's called the carbon fee and dividend program. And that is sort of revenue neutral, and any dividends go back to Americans?
Back to anybody with a Social Security number in America.
Tell us a little more about this.
What's the notion? We've got a crisis. We've got a global crisis on our hands. Environmental policy is no longer domestic policy. And here we have an administration and a Congress that has allowed this president to take us away from the Paris Climate Accord.
How would this thing work?
Not only should we be at the table, we should be leading the table.
How would this work?
And carbon fee and dividend is a simple notion of putting a price on carbon. If we are going to migrate from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable energy economy, money, we have got to provide incentives and disincentives. And the most thoughtful way to do so is this bipartisan. In fact, this has Republican roots. It's a bipartisan notion to put a price on carbon and return all of that money to American families. It would be about $2,000 for a family of 4. It would all come back.
Is it revenue neutral? Or?
It's ultimately revenue neutral.
This sounds hugely bureaucratic. I don't want to see gas taxes triple, quadruple, whatever it may be. That's a very regressive tax. Costs are going to go up for folks for heating, for et cetera. I mean, across the board. Look, the only other country that has imposed this type of a scheme has rejected it now, and that was Australia. They've actually gone in the other direction. And so
what should be done? I'm curious, from where you sit, being in the climate caucus,
I don't think we should have left the Paris Accords. I think we should be leading the effort because there are solutions for clean, affordable energy, and nuclear energy is a key part of that. No greenhouse emissions. We should be doing more with our technology similar to France and European countries. That's one way to keep the base load going, and then focus on renewables. I'm a strong advocate for renewable energy.
But these the votes simply don't match the quotes, Congressman. And
I author bills for renewable energy.
A lifetime rating of 16% from the League of Conservation
Well,
Voters.
that's not exactly a nonpartisan organization, right?
But it's truthful.
I have a question from a listener, from a viewer, John, who wants to know about student loan debt. It's $1.5 trillion as of the second quarter of this year. It says that there doesn't seem to be a plan to forgive loans. Would you work on legislation for student loan relief, full forgiveness perhaps, or some?
Well, it's a massive problem. In fact, just today, I was with about 50 people. We were talking about debt in this country and how it's affecting people, both medical related and also educational related. And we can do better. I think it's time that we treat educational debt similar to how we treat consumer debt. I know too many people, young people, who are paying a higher interest rate on their education loans than on their car loans.
What to do about
it? And Pell Grants. Pell Grants have not kept pace with inflation over the years. We've got to make it easier for those who aspire to be educated and be self-sufficient in this country. It is the bridge between Republican notions and Democratic notions to make it more accessible. There are ways to do so. I'm also watching New York State closely. They just issued a new program that affords free SUNY education, State University of New York educations, 2 and 4 years to any New York student of any New York family that earns less than $125,000 a year. There is a way to do this.
What's doable
well, I
on this
think
issue?
we know that programs that are, say, college is free is not going to be free. That's going to fall on taxpayers. But I will say this, is that the problem we have had with higher education, thankfully, we have a strong, growing competitive economy now, so young people are getting out, their upward mobility, they can pay off some of these loans. But all the studies that have been done, New York Federal Reserve has shown that when you give Pell Grants, you also have about 50 cents of every dollar going into tuition increases. When you have student loans going out, 60 cents of every dollar go into tuition increases. So we have to do other fundamental changes with these institutions rather than just relying on money coming from the federal government. That's hurting the students ultimately.
Just one word, for recreational marijuana legalization or against? Or?
I believe it's time that we take marijuana off the Schedule I list of narcotics, and I think it should be up to states to pass legislation that's appropriate as they see fit.
No.
Okay.
Who would you vote for House Speaker? I'm curious. Who would you want to see as House Speaker?
Well, I think it's presumption. The presumption is that with Republicans back in charge, it would be Kevin McCarthy, and I would certainly support him.
He's the number 2 fellow.
Yeah, he's the number 2 guy right now, and you know.
Pelosi or somebody else if the Democrats are in charge?
As I've said countless times, it's time for new leadership on both sides of the aisle. There's a reason I take no money from members of Congress, and the only one in the country, as far as I know, who doesn't, because when I make that vote for Speaker of the House, should I have the honor of serving, it'll be because of principle, not because of party.
You got a name?
Not yet. I'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I'd like to think there's a new generation of leaders waiting.
Thank you, fellas. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Remember that all of our debates are available to watch again by going to tpt.org/almanac. We also want you to put the date of November 2nd on the calendar. That's when we'll hold the final debate in the campaign for Minnesota governor, right here on Almanac. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again next week, and be careful. Great.
Almanac is made possible by members of this public television station. With the